send you this Google Doc because you sent me the website, but I need your email.
Okay, guys, we're live. Okay. I want to thank everyone for being patient with us while we were dealing with our technical difficulties. And I really appreciate it. Today is 8/21, which is the start of our event, which is Nothing to Lose But Our Chains. And it is a conversation about healing within the Black community and really just focusing on how we're going to support each other during this time of hurt and as we grieve our brothers and our sisters who have passed away by murder, and how are we going to move forward as a collective. And I really want to thank our panelists, Manuel Brown, Diva Gibbons, Gerald Bradford, Threat Brown, and Lotus. And Michaela Reedy is actually going to be our moderator for today. I will be joining the conversation and supporting, and I really want to get everyone introduced. If we can start with Michaela and introduce herself, and then we'll go forward from there.
My name is Michaela. I'm currently a college student. I'm not sure what else do you want me to say in this piece. That's all I got. My name is Michaela. I'm a college student. I like to explore what it means to just I don't know, I like to ask hard questions. How did we get here? What is here? How do we heal from where we're at in this current place? So yeah, that's everything you really need to know about me.
Let's go with Diva next, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm Diva Givens. I'm related to a couple of the people here. I think where Lindsay gets her love of being in the center of looking at the way that our people have been gone through history, has been come from many of her aunts, her uncles, myself, her father, because all of us have been affected by what's happened in the world because of the place that African Americans have been put in through the centuries. 400 years of suffering, of pain, of anguish, of jubilation, celebration, all of the things that we have faced through the years, through the civil rights movement, through slavery, through Jim Crow. We and our parents and our grandparents have all gone through that, and we are all still going through trying to figure out our place in the world, our place in the universe, and how do we relate to what's going on presently. I'm a poet. I also had my own business when Lindsay was growing up. It was called Griot, and where I was a storyteller of African and Jamaican stories that came over to the United States through slavery, and also helped with many school activities as far as helping young Black women who were transitioning from girlhood into womanhood. And through the course of that, have been very active politically as well as socially in social justice for African Americans. So I will later be reading a couple poems and also talking about some of the things that we're confronting right now through the deaths, the protests that are ongoing, not just now, but have been ongoing through my lifetime. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks for introducing yourself, Threat. What about you next? You're on mute. I can't hear you.
Okay, now you can hear me. Good looking out. So again, I'm gonna say that I appreciate being invited to the circle. Lindsay reaching out to me, keeping me informed, keeping me connected and updated on a lot of things. I'm detached from social media because I'm in the process of building something. I want to complete something and create a actual functionable opportunity, and then come back to the social media platforms to express, process of new transitioning in which directions we should be going. I'm very collective. I'm a collective thinker. I'm a collective builder. I don't like to do things by myself because I understand the true importance of group demonstrations. And in these trying moments, it is true. We need each other more than we can possibly imagine. And I believe the bigger component of unity and togetherness amongst us, is, especially Black people, is that the younger generation and our elderly generation, I feel like once that connection is more understandable, then everything else in the middle to play its part. So I like to consider myself a mediator. I'm a youth advocate. I've been youth empowerment driven since forever and a day. I'm gang affiliated experience, renounced my affiliations with gang activities, formerly incarcerated. So I share a lot of my experience with allies. I share a lot of my experience with people who's not familiar with this culture and the addictions that come along with it. A lot of people don't like to look at gang banging or, youth violence or violence in general as an addiction, but it's equivalent to crack or alcoholism. It's the same thing. So I believe by joining these circles and bouncing ideas and being open and for real with each other when we do share our perspectives and our point of view, I think that that's the holistic component. So I'm willing to hear everything that I need to hear. I'm glad to be sharing and hope that what I share is received in the same manner. And I know we'll be able to figure out what we're supposed to do by keep doing this. And I appreciate y'all again. Thank you.
Lotus, can you go next, please?
Definitely. Thank you again for inviting me to this panel. I'm very grateful to be a part of this. Greetings and salutations to everyone else that is a part of this and that is watching from Facebook and YouTube. My name is Shaughnessy, but I go by Lotus Lazuli. I'm a mother. I have a 14-year-old son. I am also a Pan-African, so my focus is on the liberation of Black people across the diaspora, revolutionary, and my lifestyle, embodying what it is to be a revolutionary. I am also a master level Reiki practitioner, so I do hands-on energy healing and spiritual counseling. And yeah, so my focus and my heart is on loving people, on elevating and liberating my community, and doing whatever the ancestors lead me to do to fulfill that liberation.
Mr. Bradford, will you go next, please?
Good evening. My name is Gerald Bradford, and I am from Seattle area, Garfield High School, University of Washington. I spent a number of years hustling on the corner, but my hustle ultimately led me back to University of Washington, where when I graduated, I started working for the juvenile, working with at-risk youth, and I was one of the first street outreach workers in the city. What I'm doing right now, I'm the reentry manager for Renton Technical College. I work with folks that are system impacted. Prior to COVID, we were going into the prisons, talking to men and women about their potential and getting them to realize that there are no throwaway people and that they are truly worth what they want. But the challenge is listening to what those individuals want in order for them to give them a roadmap or a game plan in order for them to be able to be successful. Part of that success is making sure that individuals are tied into services so that they're able to move themselves forward. We have a nonprofit called Fresh Start. I worked that with Terry Morgan. He's the president. And what we do is we go in and do transitional services for YWCA, DOC, and diversion. So thank you for allowing me to be in this space.
And last, Manny, will you go next?
Hi, all. Thanks for inviting me for this. I am Manuel Brown. I am Lindsay's uncle, married to Diva's sister. I am retired at this point, and I've lived most of my life in Spokane area, which at that time was about 2% people of color. Only family in our school area So we're the only Black family in the school that we went to of 1,200 kids. And we have moved from there to San Francisco area. I got my diversity as far as culture, which I'm so grateful for. and you know, living in Oakland area would not really educated me in what community could be and should be. I am involved in justice, racial justice, as far as I took a trip to Selma. 50th year in Selma was, I think, 2015, and took my almost 90-year-old dad with me. And when I came back, I decided it was something I had to do. So I started what we call a flash stance in the Issaquah area. And we stand on the corner backing Black Lives Matter and marginalized folks. We stand on a different corner each weekend, including Issaquah, Kirkland, Redmond, Woodinville. So non-people of color areas, basically. And we do that every weekend on Sundays. At this time, I've given that over to a non-person of color because I believe that it is their work to do as far as standing there and showing that Black Lives Matter. And my thought process was that people can understand if they see a person of obvious color standing on the corner saying Black Lives Matter, but why is there, 100 white people doing it? So it starts that conversation, and that was what I wanted to do, was start the conversation. So that's where we stand right now, and we've been doing this for almost 5 years, every weekend, and I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation with you, with all of you.
One thing that I have learned in my life is that poetry for my family, as what my mom taught me, is a way to kind of open up spaces and kind of give thanks to our ancestors. And it just brings us to a place, at least for me, a place of home. So I asked my mom to kind of bring us into the space and groundedness, and to read one of her poems for us before we give it to Michaela to start asking questions and start interacting with each other.
I have a number of poems that I've written throughout my life, and Lindsay is right. Poetry is a way for us, just like music, especially rap music, that our community has had forever. We come from Africa, where stories are so important. When I first started out my company, Griot, and Griot means storyteller. When I started that company, I went out and I performed poetry as well as children's stories and Black history for schools. The poem I'm going to read right now, it's probably one of the hardest ones that I ever wrote. It is about James Byrd Jr. For those who don't know who James Byrd Jr. Was, he was a man who was lynched in Texas in 1998. When that happened, just like what's happening right now, it affected me so deeply that I felt like I needed to do something. And this poem is the result of that something. And it's called Dust Storm. A quiet street in the early AM. Nights in Jasper move in dull cadence. Chains laying in the truck bed with no white sheets to cover them up and no sentry to sound the alarm. Signs of the dust storm coming. Ain't no time for a Black man to be on Highway 96. Fear, just a word. Terror, just a feeling. Fly away, far away from here, bird. Crusted brown leaves can't retell a backwoods lynching. He was crouched against the fist and boots, losing his life. And someone's perverted way of thinking, crying to the moon, which had turned blood red. Scream out loud, for what's coming next takes away all that's proud. Pavement smoking from the friction, flesh eaten by asphalt, measuring pain in miles and minutes taken on the guise of eternity. Mercy long since covered her eyes and justice gone to sleep. Hunting for the night coon, ragdoll flopping, bursting through seams, death comes soon. So much grime on this 82 Ford, the kind that can't never be washed off. History blown about on some vigilante gust, and this four-wheeled weapon, this hellish rig, drags its wretched victim while they whoop and holler to the sound of bones cracking. Formulated pain set to ignite, baptism into the brotherhood on Independence Day. But opportunity came early that June night. Which would James Byrd Jr. choose? If he was to rise again, severed arm with exposed shoulder dangling, or down the road a piece, his head so disfigured his mama wouldn't recognize it, or maybe what's left of fleshless torso. No cooling board for him to lie in peace while they mourn his loss. Monstrous deeds by 3 white men, pure evil in the mind of this man king. No shred of royal, no sign of regal. John William King, 65% of your body covered in loathing, permanent tattooed scars on your flesh, surface reminders of a rotted soul, etched in ink. Now who's the colored one? Now who's the hunted one? Wind keeps blowing, dust won't settle on the strip of road, because the hate just growing and growing and growing.
Thank you so much for sharing, Mom. I really appreciate you. So I want to just bring Michaela into this space. Michaela's my baby. I have known her for a few years now. And the first time I met her, she had so many questions and some very hard questions, and she still does to this day. But a couple of weeks ago, she called me and she was asking me about how to deal with pain when it comes to racial identity and when you're struggling with the world who sees you as a person of color, as a Black woman. And the first time you hear the word nigger, and that's really hard, because how do you tell a youth that this is something that I've experienced more times than you should, right? So I wanted her to actually come into this space and start the conversation, so that way she gets to ask these questions, and we're here to support also hopefully other young people who are listening to this, and other adults who are listening to this who still don't know how to navigate the space or have the conversation. Michaela.
Yeah, as Lindsay said, most recently I came across my first, well, maybe not my first, but my first big racial encounter, where it really had me like starting to think about just this world and how we got here. How do you deal with it? How do you heal from it? So when Lindsay asked me if I could do this event, I immediately wanted to say no, just for multiple reasons. It's like a little traumatizing for me to even like bring up, but I know this isn't just me. I know this doesn't happen to just me. It happens to multiple people. And so if we can talk about it and discuss how to heal from things like this, maybe it's a step in the right direction. So ultimately, I decided to facilitate, come up with these questions. So yeah, I'm a little nervous, so bear with me. Not much of a public speaker, but yeah, like we were saying, so we're talking about healing. So I thought it was only right to start off with what is healing in the Black community, and what does it look like to you, to kind of set the foundation for the conversation. So I'll leave that open to you guys.
All right, hello. I'm not on mute, am I?
No, we can hear you.
Okay, so this is a great question. And it's Michaela, right?
It is.
Michaela, how old are you?
I'm turning 19 in September.
Okay. So what does healing look like in the community? I've come to realize over time that the ability to accept time as the truth of the matter, because like they say, all things heal with time. Also, the ability to understand self. Like when you talk about, there's a lot of things going to happen in the community. I realize that I see a lot of stuff, and a lot of stuff that I see, it affects me, right? And that becomes a trigger mechanism. And so how do I not become numb, but how do I accept the fact that crazy stuff is going to happen almost every day? And the moment that I started to accept that reality, that violence, negative things that we don't want to talk about, things that we don't want to see, I accepted the fact that the odds of me not seeing that happen every day is like slim to none. So I approach life with the acceptance of tragedies being the norm. And so once I'd done that, then I started to say to myself, what am I willing to take on? What type of pressures am I allowing myself to receive? It's important for people to say we got to remain and stay open to life and its situations. But then when we remain open, then we allow ourselves to stay open to both the negatives, the positive. And if we don't know how to balance and filter out those things, then become overwhelming. And by me wanting to heal, I had to form this sense of, because I always thought about self-healing as a selfish thing. And that's the reason why a lot of people I know don't really focus on self-healing. They want to help others and do other things for other people. But now I'm in a space to where self-healing is important. Sometimes I just don't feed into a lot of the tragedies that happen. Because if you spend the most of the time feeding into the tragedies, and you're going to be overwhelmed every single day, because every single day is going to be something. So allow yourself to accept certain things and put your energy into certain situations, and make sure that the situations that we put our energy in is close to us. Now, most people might say something, I ain't gonna take up too much time, but I hear a lot of people would see a tragedy happen in another state. And this is how I operate. I'll see a tragedy happen all the way in New York, violent, done something bad to a Black man or a Black woman, something brutal, but I can't allow New York situations to pull me all the way to New York when I got my own problems right here at home. And so that becomes overwhelming. That's why I say understanding the fact that time heals all things, knowing that everything is going to happen, some negative is going to happen every single day. Pick and choose what you allow to consume your energy, and make sure that what you give your energy to is something that you can possibly sustain and deal with. And I'm gonna just back out of there and allow some space for other people.
Yeah, this is Manny. What is healing in the Black community? First of all, I think the Black community has to realize that we are a community. We are as one, and that Black Lives Matter, right? I applaud the two gentlemen, Fred and Gerald, was working with gangs that convincing others that Black Lives Matter and that we are a community within a community. And to be able to do that, I think is the first step in allowing that healing process to take hold. So you gentlemen, thank you so much for doing what you do.
I can go next. I feel like healing for our community definitely has to start with us reestablishing our connection to our roots, which is Africa, especially pre-colonization, when we were a matrilineal culture. And so as a young woman, I encourage you to connect back with mama, because that is going to be the source of your power to be able to walk through this white hegemonic society that we live in, connecting with your ancestors, and knowing and understanding that we are at war. And it's on all of us to do our part to educate ourselves, to organize, and to strategize within our community so that we can liberate ourselves from the oppression that we're in, and we can actually show up and fight in this war and no longer just be slaughtered. And so I encourage you to connect with and establish your connection with Africa, and know that it is through your ancestors and through your lineage, especially as a woman, that you're going to have that power to heal yourself and heal generations.
Can I kind of bridge off of that a little bit? So I love how you talked about like going back to Africa and how our roots stem from Africa. How do you connect with Africa when your soul is comes from there, right? Your ancestors and everything come from there. But we have this, or at least for me, Americanized way of thinking, or even appearance, you know? So how do you connect with people that you know to be yours, but look at you as other?
So you have to know that you're African. And it's inside of you, it's in your DNA. It is the seed from which you come from. And so, or the womb from which you come from. And so no outside validation is going to give you that. You have to validate that within yourself. And I said study because it's important to look at, you know, the teachings of ancestors and those that are still alive that have laid out the information before us for us to be able to connect with our culture. People like Dr. John Henrik Clark, Dr. Marimba Ani, you know, there's Dr. Amos Wilson, Malcolm X, you know, there's so much, there's a plethora of information out there, especially now we have so much access to it, that you could begin to do some studying and study your culture, study who your ancestors were pre-colonization, also throughout the last 2,000 years, especially during the Mayafa, which is the Holocaust that we've been experiencing for the last 400 plus years. So through studying your culture, you will begin to get a sense of pride and a sense of connection to your culture. And so, you know, I'm a student myself, and really most recently going really deep into studying, and I've never felt as much pride right now. I've never felt as much pride before as I feel right now for being an African woman. So I encourage you to study. I encourage you to go within yourself, whatever form you want to do that in. Me, I use meditation, but to go within yourself and connect with the ancestors because they're inside of you. That umbilical cord that we have, that connection to mama, never was severed. It's only an illusion that we think that it is. And so we have to just access that power that we have within us. So.
Wow, I guess I'll go. Wow, I want to give honor to those that spoke before me. Wow, what a great question that you have, Michaela. And there's no, no ready answer to be rolled out. One of the comments that I thought I heard you say was the use of the word, the N word. And it just comes back to when you're talking about our particular trauma in our community, is that our people don't know who they are. They don't have any kind of contextual reference to their history. So I do some work with some young people prior to COVID at the Green Hill School through the African American Culture Group. And one of the things, these are the real shooters. These are the guys who are sitting down and doing time and who are gang affiliated, who are following different examples that were set in their community. But when those young men are sitting down, right now, one of the things that they are asking us is they want to know about their history. They want to know who they are. And I think part of being able to bring that to our young people is part of the healing, because we're really running around giving, being imitations, false imitations of our true selves. So I wrote some things down, and we wear the mask. And what I mean by that is, in order to be able to fit in a certain situation, we adapt. And our people have always been adapting, but what we're adapting to are false narratives of what the media, TV, and what our community portrayals are. I was talking to my buddy the other day, or actually it was today, about when that paradigm shifted, and that happened in the early 90s, and where the messaging with the music changed. There were groups like Public Enemy, the X-Clan, Poor Righteous Teachers, and they were really pushing out some real positive messaging to the community. And then NWA hit. And when NWA hit, it changed everything up. Everything went gangster. And it's not that the street life was never there, it's just it wasn't glorified. And so with the glorification of that type of life, people attracted to it. And so with that attraction, that sold money. I mean, that made the record companies buku money, but it also made the prisons buku money as well, because that's where because we were had false impressions of ourselves, we're going to prison over trying to act out and be something that we truly weren't. Our parents never raised us to be gang members. Streets folks didn't raise him to be in a gang. They raised him to be where he's at right now, but community factors take it in another way. One thing that we don't do in our communities, we don't discuss mental health and trauma. Those are taboo for our young people. Oh, what's wrong? You slow, you don't need to go there. And that's for white people. In reality, it's for all people. And lastly, I will say this is that where all these value systems really start at is at the schoolyard. And it starts in elementary school, where you have teachers that are able to have the ability to pick winners and losers. And oftentimes, if you have instruction that is not reflective of you, then the winners are people who look like the teacher. And that sets a real negative trajectory for a young African-American student trying to be able to figure out who he is, when you're never being able to be instructed in culture relevant information that pertains to you in order to build your own self-worth. So I guess one of the ways that you're able to start changing that dynamic is to start educating the community earlier about who they are with regards to African American history, letting people know their genius, and prompting them to read. And it's not, the revolution is not going to be televised. There's going to be some studying that's going to be associated with it. We have to have folks like yourselves who are on these calls promoting that growth in the community. Thank you.
And I'd like to kind of chime in and follow up with some of what has been said as far as educating ourselves. Back about 30 years ago, when my children were in school, I wanted to give to them a little bit of knowledge or a gift of their history. However, I didn't have a whole lot to give them. I didn't know my history. Like Manny was talking about, we grew up in a culture that was very white in Spokane, Washington, and very few African Americans. Many people throughout the course of history, and I look at our parents, the parents decided that they were going to move away from the areas that were causing so much pain and anxiety and violence. Our parents moved from the South up to a place that they thought they could raise their children. The issue was that we lost something when we moved into areas that no longer we could see ourselves. We could not see or listen to the people who could give us information, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, our cousins, those kinds of things. So many times, African Americans choose to leave the areas that are causing all the violence and hurt, and take their children away. And that's what happens to many African Americans. I found a book called Anansi the Spider. And Anansi the Spider opened up a whole new world for me and for my children and for the people around me, because that was a story that came from Africa. It was a story that was generations. It traveled, and I did a lot of research on this. Traveled because he was a trickster, and he was from Africa, our stories. He went to, with us, followed us through slavery into the Americas. First went to the islands and became Aunt Nancy, and then came to America as Brer Rabbit. And these stories that were told through the generations, that's why storytelling is so important to the African and African American culture. We have to tell our stories, and we have to be able to make sure that we know our stories. Those stories that I began to tell, I began to research and look up and tell the Brer Rabbit stories and the Nancy stories and the Aunt Nancy stories. And it bloomed into being able to talk to schools and libraries and about how our history came. We are spoken word. We didn't write things down. There is some written history from back in generations past, but most of it was just like for Native Americans and for our European ancestry. Storytelling was important. So as we begin to really look at healing, we need to look at the stories of our grandparents and the stories of our great-grandparents and the stories that we produce and give to our children. Because without those stories, our culture just goes into so many different directions that we can't find ourselves. Because things were not written down, then we have to really seek those people that still know our stories. And that's where I think that Lotus was talking about, those African stories that come through history, and we have to find that history. It's not like our European neighbors who can look at their history and see it right there. We've got to dig. And as we dig, we find so much that is, beautiful and wonderful about our culture. I think part of it is we have to do so much work to get it that it becomes a little bit frustrating, and we don't, it's hard work. So to do that hard work, we have to really begin to search out and seek out and ask and collectively build that together. Thanks.
I think for me is, everyone has kind of touched on this, finding out who you are and finding out what our culture is. I didn't like being Black for the first, I think, 8-9 years of my life. I had white Barbie dolls. I remember when I was a kid, and this is how my mom started doing storytelling, is a group of girls had me sign a slavery contract. And I did for a good 3 or 4 weeks until my teacher found one of the slavery contracts in the garbage. And, my mom came into the room and she threw all of my Barbies away. And she said, "You can't play with your white Barbies. You only get the Black ones." And I was like, "I don't want to be Black anymore. I was told, you know, drink bleach and your skin color will be lighter, and don't be proud of who you are as a Black person. I was maybe one of three or four kids, not including my brothers, in my school who were Black. So I came from California where it was diverse back to University Place where it wasn't so diverse. And I didn't know that Black was beautiful. And as I grew up, I still resented being Black. You know, my mom is on the lighter side and my dad is on the darker side. And so I always wanted to be the color of my mom, and I always wished to be the color of my mom. And as I'm getting older and I'm asking my mom and my aunts and my uncles what my history is, and, you know, trying to figure out who my great grandparents are, because I can only go as far as my grandparents, and trying to find out my history and trying to find out what that looks like, that's hard because it part of me is broken. And then also talking about generational trauma, how can I heal something within myself that I don't even know? And if I think about that for myself, and then we start thinking, I think about that on a larger scale, like how are we supposed to heal something that we don't necessarily know except for the history books, and or if you know by your family. Like we have to figure out a way to start healing in a community sense, and start talking about things that we don't like to talk about, and start treating each other with more respect than we have, because we have a struggle, men treating, you know, either Black men with respect, Black women treating Black women with respect. We need to start figuring out a way to where we can to heal past the broken parts of ourselves so we can build a community that can thrive.
Hey, Lindsay, can I make a comment on what you just said and what your Miss Diva said? Because this is coming back to I've been doing a lot of research around this, and I subscribe to a podcast called Black Minds Matter with Dr. Luke Wood and Dr. Harris out of San Diego State. And at the end of the day, what we're talking about is cultural identity. And when you had segregation, you had a different, when we were forced to actually be in communities with each other, there was a different outlook on your beauty, okay? And when integration happened, this is when the changes started to happen with regards to who you are as a culture. And what I will say is there was an experiment where they brought in a number of African American kids, and they had one white doll and they had one Black doll. And the kids would come in and they were asking, well, which doll is the good doll? Which is the doll that you want to be friends with? And you saw Black child after Black child pick up the white doll, reinforcing what you're just saying right now, Lindsay. And so when you have the deconstruction of the Black family and you're taking out the role models, what your mom was talking about was generational relationships between the son, the father, and the grandfather. When you deconstruct the Black family, you tear that framework apart. So the elders aren't there. So if you don't have elders to guide you, which direction do you go?
So while everyone was talking, a question came up. I didn't have this typed out, but one of the questions that I was talking with my mom and even Lindsay about a few days ago was, how do you choose between like geographical locations for your children, right? You have this option of moving somewhere predominantly white, with more opportunities, with more resources readily available, or you could stay in your community with people that look like you, but you don't have the necessary resources available. You don't have the things that you would see in white neighborhoods, right? So do you move out for better opportunity, or do you stay for your culture, for your people? How do you navigate that?
Well,
You stay. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
that is exactly what we had to do with our kids. We had the choice of moving up from San Francisco area, Oakland area, had a choice to Tacoma or Issaquah, right? And I taught high school for about 6-7 years, and I have yet to run into a parent that says, I'm going to make the worst choice I can for my child. I have yet to run into one, right? And it's easy to sit back and look at someone's life and say, oh, I wouldn't have made that choice. But each of us have our own baggage that we carry, right? And you can't, someone says, well, you can't walk in their footsteps or their shoes. They're absolutely right, because your shoes include the whole baggage, all the luggage that you carry with you, right? And my wife and I have had that discussion about, would we have made the same choices? You know, our kids are great, you know, they got good educations, but what did we miss out on? That is the question, right? We missed out on community. You know, we did join Jack and Jill, which is a Black women's organization that help areas that are not as diverse as most places are, many places are. But to ask yourself, would I have made different choices? You know, you put yourself in a dilemma of, okay, if I did, where would I end up? Where would my kids end up? You know, what difference would it make? Or would it make a better difference or less? So I think it's a matter of time. I believe Gerald was talking about time heals all. Or was it Trent? I can't remember. Yeah, that, you know, you make the decision at the time, at the best decision you can for you, your life, your kids, and try to make the best of it. And also realizing that if you move to a non-diverse area, that you've got to find some place where you can identify with. And to be able to do that, you have to travel 20, 30 miles to do so and make the effort and force kids. A lot of kids, you know, they don't want to go, oh, I don't want to go there. Well, not my friends. You know, I only see them once a week. But if you force them at the age where it makes a difference, I think that they can take that into account as they grow. So yeah, you got to make those decisions as they come, and hopefully you make the best decision you can.
Thank you.
I want to add, go ahead, Lotus, because I was on the same page as you. Go ahead.
So what I was gonna say is, so we're in a white hegemonic society, which means white people are dominating politically, economically, psychologically, physically, culturally, and there are responses to being in that society when you're a victim of it, and those responses are homicidal, suicidal, assimilation, or a nation builder, right? And so to be homicidal is that you are more likely to act out violence on those that look like you as opposed to those that are oppressing you, right? Suicidal, actual suicide, eating yourself into suicide, you know, slandering other people, excuse me, that's homicidal. But yeah, so suicidal is, you know, whether physically taking your life or slowly taking your life. And then you have assimilationist. Assimilationist is the proximity to whiteness. And so moving into a white neighborhood, sending kids to a white school, you know, getting that good job, reducing your proximity to whiteness as a response to the oppression. And then the other is nation building, and that is actually staying in that community and building up that community, because traditionally we know that as African people, there's no difference between our immediate family and our community. Our community is our family. And so by leaving the community and going into these other neighborhoods is essentially abandoning the family. And the family isn't going to restore itself. So by abandoning our family, we are kind of perpetuating this dysfunction. But it's a response to trauma. So it's not a bad thing, or I can't say it's not a bad thing, but you know, we have to look at it for what it is. It's a direct response to the trauma that's being experienced being African in a white hegemonic society. So me personally, I'm a nation builder. So I'm going to stay in my community and I'm going to do what I have to do to build my community and contribute in that way. So that would be my answer.
And I want to say that in a combination of both circuits, because what Manny said is too, is a lot of this stuff is situational based, you know, because you don't know what happens or what will put a person in position to have to move. And when we speak about these broad spectrums within the community, like I know within the community, I've always lived in like extremely hostile communities. It seems for whatever the reason, I've always ended up there, and no matter where we ended up moving, it was always into a community that was extreme, right? And me knowing now, one of the most important parts is that if I can afford to, which means that if ain't nobody really trying to hunt me down or trying to really kill me or really trying to have it out for me like that, then restoration of the community is the most prominent thing that we should be doing. Because if we having problems within our own community, establishing ourselves, and it's hard because it becomes extremely toxic. The building process is extreme. The ability to want to group and connect together is extreme when we have to grow together as a people, like you said, Lotus, to be a nation builder. To build that nation, it takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of hope, it takes a lot of belief, it takes a lot of intention, you know, and sometimes detouring away from that seems like the easier thing. But when Manny said, what did I miss out on? And what type of scenarios have I not allowed minds to experience? And so, and there's not a right or wrong way to say it, because sometimes people just have to relocate. But if you have a choice, that isn't life threatening to that degree, then staying within your community and building, because if we don't, we're going to continue to keep trying to run and find a way away from ourselves, because it is a abandonment of family. And if we look for other opportunities outside of ourselves, then we'll never come together and we'll never be able to restore what should be restored. So I agree with both of those answers to the max, for real.
I'd like to chime in maybe from a different perspective. And so as I'm listening to this particular question, there's some things that came up to me, which is during Jim Crow, there was the adage was separate but equal. So you had separate facilities, but they were supposedly be equal, right? That changed with Brown versus Board of Education, with the integration of schools. And at that point, when you look at how schools are set up in how they're funded are through property taxes. And so if you live in an area that is not generating a lot of income for property tax, likelihood of your school system is going to be a poor school system. And so because of housing codes, that it comes back to what the Sister Lotus was saying, we live in a society white that is governed by white supremacy. And ultimately housing codes kept us in certain ghettos. So with the inability to be able to move, so even if you were a family that had means and you tried to move out of the ghetto, there were housing codes that prevented you from actually moving into another area, you know. And so these systems were all set up in order to keep folks in their social classes. And the social class for Black folks is to be able to not have the socioeconomic ladder that our white neighbors have. But it kind of comes back to just education, housing, and the monies that are associated that goes to the school.
And to kind of leap on to that, it's one of the things that we experienced. You know, Manny was talking about that some of us in the Black community experienced our parents fleeing. You know, they left the South, and it was a life or death situation. I remember my mother when we were in Fort Worth, Texas, back when I was very, very young, driving through a community, and I probably was maybe 3 years old, and she'd gotten lost. She didn't know quite where she was, but she knew she was in a white community. She was in a white neighborhood. She told us to be quiet. She was very fearful. It's something that stuck in me. I remember that, and as a 3-year-old, you know, you don't remember a lot, but those types of situations that stick where there's so much fear and anxiety. My mother finally made her way out of the neighborhood. However, I remember the fear in her that lasted for quite a while because of that. So when my parents left the South and they went to the North, my dad actually was in the military, so he got to move a lot of different places. He had access to neighborhoods and places because of the military that other people did not. So like you were saying, Gerald, there were opportunities that were presented to certain good Negroes and people who were accessible to the white community because they let us in because we were that good Negro. And we've got the house Negro and we've got the field Negro. And we are still playing those roles to this day, where we have people who could assimilate into the white community because they let us. And then people who were not that, were the field Negro that had to go out there and work, and they were looked on as less than. And we can see that through what Lindsay was saying. One thing that I remember is the brown paper bag that would be put next to a Black person. If you were lighter than that bag, you were a good Negro. If you were darker than that bag, they didn't want nothing to do with you. We have many, many things talking about the traumas in our life that our parents and our grandparents went through that are a part of us. And so as we moved into those good neighborhoods for our children, for our education, for all the things that we wanted, just like the white kids and the white parents, we had to give up. And so it is a no-win situation when you got to give up your education or be around the people that are like you. And those are the things that our parents and our grandparents faced on a regular basis. So yes, we are at a place now where we have more choices. But I can tell you, growing up in the South, we did not have those choices. There was the redlining. There was, we were redlined when we went to Spokane. They did not want us moving into that neighborhood. They sent, I think we had quite a few people who signed a petition to get us out of that neighborhood. My parents stuck to that. Their courage, I look at their courage and I look at what they did for us as their children, 7 children. We all got education. We all have been successful, but it was because of the courage of our parents. So yes, there is that question of, do we stay with the people that look like us, or do we try to move forward with the people who don't look like us? It's a no-win situation until we decide that we are going to win. And I think having conversations like this is a way that we win.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone that shared, by the way. So bridging off of that last question, my next question was going to be, how do we grow, or how do we get the Black community out of this lack mentality? So this mentality that we don't have enough. Even though we are the majority, why do we keep staying in this mindset that we're the minority? And how do we get out of it? I'll leave that open.
In reality, we are the minority. When you look at us per capita across the country, we are. It's 13% across the country. But when you look at who's housed in the prison, it's half the population in there is Black. So that right there, this is the issue with regards to the systems. So these systems are set up, in my opinion, through the education or miseducation in order for us to stay in poverty and or be on a track to the penitentiary. And so then you have that gifted African American person that society holds up as the example. So, and usually with the examples that our community have are the athlete and the entertainer. I was actually explaining to one of my colleagues that the imaging that comes around today is so harmful because it's not showing our young people pro-social models of themselves. So I'll leave it there. It's a hard question though.
I grew up with a dad who did not have great credit, but he had to make sure that he had the latest Lexus and the latest clothing. My parents divorced when I was young and I lived with my dad. And my dad, he lived in this neighborhood. We had no furniture, but he always made sure that he had the best, right? And we had no food, but we made sure that he had the great suits, right, when he had to go for his business trips. And so and kind of passed on to me. I grew up and I had not a lot of money, but I had to make sure that I had the appearance that I had something that I didn't. And so one thing that I'm realizing at 37, I'm finally understanding the importance of credit. I'm understanding the importance of having a savings. I'm understanding the importance of having certain things that are setting myself up for my future, and not just saying that I got a Gucci bag in my purse in my closet, but I can't afford to put any money in it. Or having, making sure that I have the belt that everybody, the Louis Vuitton belt, but I can't make sure that I have food in my fridge. So making sure like we actually recognize that we are building something and not just saying, I'm going to get the newest and greatest Jordans and or the greatest purse or these things, because they are just things. We don't need the newest car. We don't need the newest belt. We don't need the newest shoes. We just need to make sure that we are building within our families and ourselves, for me, and making sure that we are teaching our kids and our nephews and our nieces and our families what the importance is of saving and building, and not necessarily that you have to have the newest Jordans when you can't even put food in your fridge.
So let me ask you a follow-up question. Where do you think that mentality stemmed from? That we have to have the newest everything? That, do you think it stems from like this mentality that we have to be just as good as what like white people set the standards to in terms of appearance, or what do you think?
So I know for my family is my grandfather was from Mississippi and my grandmother was from South Carolina, and they grew up with very little. At one point, my grandfather, I remember that he used to he was actually a millionaire. He had millions of dollars. He lost it all. But even when he had the millions of dollars, he had to show that he was good enough. I remember he never looked a white person in their eyes, but he had to show them that he had the belongings to make sure that he fit into their place. And then when he lost all of his money, he still had his pension, but he still liked the image that he was still like well off. And my grandmother, I don't know where hers came from, but she had 2 houses full of belongings. It had clothes, shoes, wigs, jewelry, and it couldn't just be like costume jewelry. It had to be like 14 karat gold. And when she died, we had all of these things. And then, it just was things. And even when she didn't have money, she always bought something new. And then as I got older, I found out that it was because the way that they grew up, in the poor areas of the South, and recognizing that people, when they had these items, that they were looked at different. They were respected, they were treated better, and for and that's unfortunate because they were amazing people, and yet they had to prove themselves because they couldn't. It's in the white community and the Black community, especially in the Black church, because if my grandma wasn't wearing a new dress on a Sunday, it was mentioned by somebody else.
Could I chime in too? Um, One of the things that is important for from the jump, right? Overall, as Black people, I mean, we could talk collectively as people. Everybody's important. Everybody's special in their way. But when we talk about cultural a cultural perspective, when it comes to Black people, the thing that is important for us to realize is that we are a royal people, period, point blank, bottom line. Whether I want to accept, and this is through my beliefs and how I feel on things, from my studies and my research, as Black people, we are royal people. So the things that we see as fashionable in the fashion sense, it's a lot of styles and stuff that people took from Black culture. You get what I'm saying? Us as Black people have always thrived since the beginning. We come from an era of kings, queens, and beyond that, right? So royalty is something that we were born into. One of the biggest deceptions is that I was watching a podcast the other day by a young cat named Young Pharaoh. He's got some pretty good stuff. And so I'm listening to him, and one of the things he said is that we come from a place where gold was prevalent. Gold was in the streets like dust. Golds and diamonds lay around like normal rocks that you would see at any beach that you go to right now. It's that when the area was per se colonized, then the stones and the things that we seen as just common everyday things, they was taken and created to have a value to it. And when we strip from certain things, then we're enslaved people and we forget our identity, we forget where we come from. And so now the natural sense of royalty and style and fashion that we obediently had from the jump, it's now being dangled over our heads as a form of status. So if you look at it to the point to where if you lived a specific kind of way and I knew that your people were a royal people, I came to you, and the further down the food chain, with the further down the bloodline that it gets, you get so far and far away from your history of who you are. Now we're in a position to where prestige is something that was created now in the white sense. So when we look at privilege, the first thing we do is think of white privilege. When we hear the terms of privilege, we think of white privilege, but in actuality, we had privilege. It was just a natural thing for us to carry ourselves in that way. That's who we are. We are not worthless people. The way that we're painted today is not the identity of who we are. We're very powerful, and white folks know this. They know that we're very powerful people. When it comes to fashion, education, style, and mannerisms, we taught white folks that. If you do your deep history on these things, we taught them culture. We taught white folks how to read and write. You get what I'm saying? We taught them structure, to build a community, the foundations of things. These are things that they learned from us. And once they learned this, they used it against us. And now we're in an era right now to where we feel like we have to compete with fashion. And like what Lindsay just said right now, it's not about being competitive with people. It's not about having the Jordans. It's about understanding your spending power as Black people. Then we understand the saving power as Black people. Then we start to understand the investments within ourselves as Black people. Then we realize that we never needed anybody. And the whole fashion sense is not stuff that we really get caught up into because we are fashionable with or without the clothes or any items. And I'm gonna chime out right there, my bad.
So I think that ideology kind of goes to what I was speaking about earlier with the white hegemonic society. They dominate psychologically, economically, culturally. And so they have their cultural imperialists, and so they make their culture the standard, and everyone else has to live up to what they deem as this universal idea of culture. And so that's a form of assimilation, is to try to get the things that the white man has, do what the white man does, acquire all the little trinkets that he has that he deems as a indicator of success. So we have to start to redefine those things and create that culture within ourselves, because we're being controlled and oppressed and by a people who are destructive in every sense of the word. And so again, that goes back to learning your history and connecting with who you are at the core of who you are, and not who you are within this system, because everything that we know, everything that we do, everything that we think is influenced by white hegemony. And so we have to distinguish who we truly are from who we are within that system.
And
I'm sorry, go ahead, Miss Diva. I'll wait.
To add to that and kind of give a different viewpoint also, growing up as a child, I think that I'm one of the elders here. Looking at what we grew up with, you too, Manny, looking at what we grew up with, there was no such thing as Black beauty. There was nothing in the magazines. We did not see ourselves. What we saw on TV was when a Black person was on TV, they were a drug dealer, they were a prostitute, or they were going to get killed. You know, pretty much we knew that when there was a Black person on any show, they were an extra and they were going to get killed. And we used to joke about that. Oh, that person's going to get killed because they're Black. You know, we knew that. So growing up, we didn't have anything, and our ancestors had nothing to help us to understand beauty. One of the things that happened was that started to change that was white women. And white women started to want to have our lips, our hair. They wanted curly hair. They had straight hair. They wanted to sit out in the sun and get darker. They wanted to have big butts. You know, everything started to change. And as that changed, you know, we saw Farrah Fawcett with her braids. Those were our braids. Those weren't her braids. What we began to see was that they started to look at beauty in a different way. They wanted our beauty, but they wanted it in their form. And it started to change our lives as a people to see that, wait a second, those are the things that matter to us, and they're ours. And, you know, you can put as much Botox or, you know, black don't crack is what we always say to ourselves and they say to us, because they desire what we have. And they try to change that into their own. So what we have to do is, and have been doing, is to really start to value ourselves and value who we are. And to make that translate into, they have to look at us and see beauty. And the transition that has taken place probably in the last 20 years, I think has been a great leap forward for us to start saying, we are beautiful. And I believe that the white culture has started to believe that. Now, the other part of that is we have to define ourselves in the midst of all that. And as much as we could let them define it for us, but we don't want to allow that because it will be warped. It will be put into a place where it's no longer ours. And so we have to define beauty. We have to define success. We have to look at our children and say, we need to give back to them. We have to start looking, when Lindsay was talking about savings, the things that the white community have been able to do is to hand down houses, cars, things of value that we were all talking about. Those are all things that can be handed down from generation to generation and have been. What we have done is we've not been a part of that. So the millions of dollars that Lindsay's grandparents, both sides, were able to accumulate, those all dissolved. My parents had access to millions of dollars. My ex-husband's, Lindsay's father, his parents had access to millions of dollars. They were all lost. So there is nothing to hand down. And so we have to start looking at how we are as a people and what we give back. So we don't buy that Mercedes. Instead, we buy something else that we can hand down to our children. Saving money rather than buying that gold chain, we do what the white people do. And that is to begin to flourish and in our area, be able to give back to our children. And as we give to our children and they give to their children, we produce and we create and we make. And so the incarceration levels start to deteriorate because we have something to give our children.
Yeah, I have to agree with Diva. You don't see the Rockefellers telling their kids, "Oh, you got to start as a janitor," right? I think it's a mindset that we were taught when we were young that, oh, you got to start from the bottom, work your way up. Why? Right? There's no reason why, if your father is a supervisor, where he can't use you as a journeyman and start you from there, right? We don't seem to have that type of attitude as people of color, Black folks. But you know, if we look at those people that have financial means in the white community, they were able to hand down estates, land, cars, money, jewelry, stocks, bonds, whatever. But we, as a Black community, we were limited to even getting those things, right? I mean, my dad had to talk a white neighbor into going into the bank to pay for first payment for the house, put a down payment on the house because they wouldn't sell it to a Black man, right? So, you know, I think society is stuck on, well, how come Black folks can't just lift themselves up and forget about the last 400 years and get themselves out of it? Because it's systemically set into our society that this is where the oppressor, the white man, wants us to be. And we have taken upon ourselves to say that this is where I'm going to be, and all these things that you want us to be, that the media says that we have to be, that they're, I see one of your questions here is about sports and entertainment. Is that all we can be, right? No, I think that we have to educate our kids and those around us that we can be a lot more than that. And I'll leave you at that.
Look, I'd like to honor those that spoke before me because all of your points were just outstanding. But I want to take it here, which is I'm going to take it back a little bit further. I have been watching some videos with Dr. Edwin Nichols. He's on YouTube, and he talks about the axiom of culture. And one of the pieces that he was talking about was Willie Lynch and how that doctrine really started to form or start to be able to put fear and distrust between Black and white folks. He also talks about what our cultural values are. And so when you look at what Black people as a culture, what we value, and he's saying that we value relationship. That's very strong in the Black community. We hold relationship over everything else. And when you disrespect us, the relationship is over. He mentions that white folks, they value the object. And on all the conversations that I was hearing prior to me speaking, everyone talked about style and superficial, what you looked on the outside versus what was looking on the inside. And on that particular, when white culture values the actual object. And so he gives a story about Uncle Tom in Gary Beecher Stowe's book. And Uncle Tom was a loyal slave up until the point his family got sold. And when his family was sold, that the relationship was broken between the slave master and the slave. But the slave master looked at, he fell on hard times and needed to sell some property. So he looked at Uncle Tom's family as property. You know, so he looked at them as an object. So when you look back and, you know, how we view each other, it's behind these particular social constructs, which the society, which the cultures hold as their values. And so when you see, we live in America, and being here, we've been stripped of our God, we've been stripped of our language. We don't have a language that's common, and we've been stripped of our culture. and we are being reculturated in a non-Afrocentric society to a Western society mindset. And so we are actually portraying images of ourselves which are false. You know, so the challenge is really getting back to, for our people to understand what our strengths of and how we move, and understand how others move in order to be able to figure out how to move with them. Dr. Edwin Nichols.
I tell you, Gerald, I'm glad you made that point, because even now I'm in Spokane area. I was looking for a Black realtor, right? You go on Zillow or whatever, and you can pick, it says what language you speak, right? You can pick Spanish and Portuguese and Thai. And I said, what language do we speak, right? As a Black society, right? If I wanted to look up a Black realtor without saying, I want to look for a Black realtor, how do I find one, right? So I'm scanning through hundreds of pictures, and you know, there's nothing. And to be able to identify as a community, I think is very, very important. And to have that, I mean, there was a time when we were growing up, and Diva can tell you that learning the language Swahili was a big thing to do, right? Until the white people started learning Swahili. And then the Black folks would say, oh, well, obviously this isn't the thing that we're gonna do. So building that community, I think, is very important, and that to have something in common, we can call it the community, but how do we gather that together?
That's funny that you mentioned that. Recently I've been kind of frustrated because I've been trying to like dig down into my roots, and it's unfortunate that it's our jobs to differentiate between what is real history, what is history that white people are telling us, you know, what is my true history. And one of the things that I was talking about with my dad is, do you think Christianity was like God? Christians, were we Christians? You know, is that our base religion that our ancestors worshipped? Like, what is it, you know? And this idea around Christianity, like, I think one of the questions I had was, do you think it plays into systemic racism? So I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say about that.
I can tell you that I grew up in the Catholic Church. I have been a part of many different church. And you know, one of the things that I have learned, I actually was an assistant pastor in a charismatic Christian church at one point. My whole view has changed, and over history, over time, has changed drastically. We were brought as a people, we were brought by missionaries, just like many people of color. We were brought a book, and we were told that we had to follow that book. We were forced to follow that book as slaves. We came from cultures that had religion, that had spirituality. That spirituality that we had was not a part of the white spirituality that we were given. And so we were told that we had to leave ours behind. There are times that they incorporated some of ours and some of others into that Christian belief, part of Easter, part of Christmas, some of those things they incorporated so that we would feel more comfortable. But we were sold a bill of goods, just like many other people of color, whether it be the Hawaiians, people from other islands, and the white Jesus that we were sold wasn't even real. So one of the things that I think we have to look at in terms of our spirituality is, what do we believe? That's a personal belief as well as a cultural belief. And where did our belief stop and how do we get it back? Women were highly involved in a lot of the spiritual side for Africans. And you know, that was lost. Matriarchal societies, and those were lost. And so for us, we have to look back and we have to dig into that, just like everything else, to find out what our belief system is and the spirituality that goes with it. And we have to, you know, look at how the other parts of that religion, whether it be the ones that we've grown up with or learned, whether that is something that we want to keep. I know that I have changed dramatically through the course of years.
I'm gonna say, for one, that's a very powerful question, especially in today's time. That's an extreme question, but it's a beautiful question, because when we jump down to, you know, just the truth of the matter, as far as Black people go, no, that has nothing. That religion in itself has nothing to do with us, you know. But it is one of the most prominent. It's a fear tactic, you know. You start. It's larger to unpack than just having a small conversation with it. So what I would say to you is that I will stay up with Lindsay, and I'll make sure that I can share content and videos of research that I found, books and stuff that you can read, because there's some unpacking. But the way that you're going about it, one thing as a Black male in this world that we live in, especially Western civilization, bottom line, no, that has nothing to do with us. And if you look at the facts of how does it even come along in the Bible, or if you read the Holy Bible, it'll just outline the fact that that actual term didn't come into place until a few years after what one would consider Christ to have been crucified. So that whole terminology it has nothing to do with us. I'll send information to Lindsay. I just wanted to share with you, no, to answer your question, it has nothing to do with us.
I'll say that there's two books that I would reference. One is Christianity Before Christ by John G. Jackson, and also this book called Yurugu by Dr. Marimba Ani. I highly recommend you get this book. If you start anywhere, start here, because it's a African-centered critique of European thought and behavior. And she actually spends a lot of time speaking about Christianity and how it was a tool that was used to not only colonize Africa, but colonize the world. And they started with missionaries, which they weaponized basically their religion to colonize the world. And so I would definitely do some research and start studying and recognize and realize that that is not your religion as an African woman. And it was a tool that was used to enslave your ancestors and to continue to oppress you within the system that we're in.
I want to add to the sister right here, because you right on point right here, sis. And I was just, as this topic came up, I was thinking about Constantine the Great, who was the Roman emperor.
We call him the Greek, not the Great. Ain't nothing great about Constantine.
Well, some people consider him great. But in 325 AD, that's when they confirmed the Council of Nicaea, where they looked at all the canons, when they constructed the Bible that the modern day Bible, what it turned into. But you're right, there were a number of books that were omitted from that canon that really reflected the truth. And so when you're talking about religion, and how I equate it is those conquerors or those early explorers, they came with the Bible in one hand and a rifle in the other. So either you're going to choose this religion and fall under what we're through these missionaries and follow this new religion in your land, or we're going to give you this. We're going to give you the gun. And so when the sister was talking about what happened to the early Hawaiians, I want to just reference what happened and give honor to the Native Americans who land we're on right now, which was truly stolen. And so they did a job on the natives, they did a job on us, and they used religion as a divisionary tool. So when you look at, if you've ever watched the movie 12 Years a Slave, where the brother was educated, he knew his Bible because he was able to read, and he was subjected back into slavery. And there was a scene where the slave master was interpreting the Bible for the slaves. And one of the lines was, "Obey your master." And because we were being acculturated into Christianity or a perversion of it, we were, as slaves or our Black people, we were digesting the images and the suggestions that white folks was given to us. So at the end of the day, it comes back to what Sister Lotus is saying, is that we have to really start uncovering our history in order for us to understand what the true reality is and why religion was used and it comes back to being able to divide. When you look at America, the most segregated day in America is on Sunday.
I have to totally agree, both Lotus and Gerald. You have to look back at our ancestors. Don't go too far back, but even those that are very religious now in the Christianity mode, is because that was the day that the slave owners allowed them to gather, allowed them to be themselves. And if they had to follow the book that the owners, if they had to read the book that the owners gave them so that they could gather together, then that's how they're going to be able to do that. And that process has continued, allowing people of faith to gather together and not be criticized of how they sing, how they pray, how they kneel, all that. And we did buy into the white Jesus type of thing. And I mean, even till I was past my teenage years, it didn't occur to me that even the region that supposedly Jesus came from was not a white, right? I mean, I don't see any place in the Bible where it said Jesus was an albino, or So if you think about the lies that was told us and taught to us and preached to us so that we would buy in to systemic racism, it goes very deep in the religious section, I think. And not to leave out, I don't consider myself a religious person. I do consider myself a spiritual person, even though I did go through religion to get there, because you have to figure out what doesn't work for you before you know what works for you. And my parents were very religious, and they had one of those everyday week type of Sunday people or church people, right? So I fought that from when I was very young. Just something did not click with me. And I've had many discussions with others as the devil's advocate around religion and what it means. And I appreciate the question in itself that really sparked, I'm gonna say, anger for me when I read it, and malice for what has happened to the Black society.
I also want to add something to Mr. Brown real quick. Mr. Brown, you said something that was just profound. So I'm going to church as a youngster, and we're learning about Moses. And in Egypt, and they're talking about how Moses left Egypt, and I'm thinking to myself, well, Egypt's in Africa, and we're going to a white church, and we got the white Jesus up on the picture of the white Jesus, and I'm asking the Sunday school teacher, how can these people be white if they're in Africa? And they didn't want to talk about that. And at that point, that was kind of got turned off from religion at that point, because it's like, and as you grow up later on, you're like, well, how can you hide in Pharaoh's house if you don't look like the Egyptians?
Right. I mean, just the portrayal of what some of the Egyptian shows you've seen, and Cleopatra. Cleopatra was a black queen. Let's face it. She was in Africa, and people do not think about it in that concept. You even step up to Jesus Christ and Moses, and all these people were closer to our tone than they were to non. So, and I have to also say that I think there's a place for religion, that it brings people together. It gives them one focus, and it also, if I can use the term, keeps people in line to not to go out of do things that you wouldn't normally do, or there's something around that keep people focused in one place. So
see, but isn't that a control mechanism though?
It is a control mechanism, but being in the systemic society, even because we grew up in this society, we are controlled, right? Whether we like it or not, right? I mean, decisions we make are based on some of the questions we asked earlier. Decisions we make are based on that controlled society that we have to fit into, right? I mean, if we were radical all the time, how can we get from place A to point B and accomplish anything, right, in this society, right? So, I mean, Beth and Gerald, you guys both working hard with the folks that you're working with, and how can you not have some way work in that society and do what you do? You have to be able to work somehow in that society.
Yeah, and I think the other part of that too, Manny and Gerald, is that it's also a gathering place for us, and it always has been. And that gathering place, when you think of the Black church, it was a place that we went for refuge. For those of us who grew up in white communities, the Black church was the only place that we could go and see ourselves. Also, for those of us who grew up in areas that were predominantly Black, it was the place that we congregated, and we learned the things that we needed to survive. So as much as we got the spiritual lessons that went with that, we also got to learn how to be Black people living in a white world. And that the church was the place where we all congregated and we learned, whether that be to protest, because that's where the protests actually, sprung from, to be able to communicate with one another, to be able to help one another. The churches was where we learned how to do that. The issue is the teachings that came with it. And those teachings from the Bible that didn't correlate with who we are as a people, but we kept those. And I think that's the issue, is that we go back and forth on, is it the spiritual learning, or is it the congregation of coming together? And so we have to kind of figure that out.
Michaela, you stirred up bees nest with that one, I think.
I sure did. Does anyone have any final thoughts? Or
Well, what I would say is, just like everybody in here was saying, you asked some very great questions. I hope the information that we've shared here, you know, is information that you could apply to yourselves, but like, I know we all feel that you should always dig deep, always do your research, regardless of what you're getting from anybody, regardless of what you're getting from us. Always stand firm on your own too. Always continue to seek knowledge. These folks with that cliche, if you want to hide the truth from Black people, put it in books. Up until this point, there's been seeming to be a predominant accurate thing because we don't like to read and research. But get into the habits of wanting to do that. Read more. And if you're not into reading, some YouTube audios, it'll give you the same effect. And my last things to you and all of us really is, you know, stay connected to people that bring you light in this dark world that we're living in. You know the difference between a person that's trying to steer you wrong and a person that's trying to help you elevate and level yourselves up. Stay extremely connected to the Black women in the community that are on this vibration of higher achievement, higher leveling. Don't allow yourself to be completely immersed and affected by the things that happen in this world. Pick and choose what you allow to fight your battles. Pick and choose your battles. Don't allow people to just pull you and suck you into any type of situation, and be mindful of your emotions and your attachments to things that are going on, because we can't change everything at one time, but if we collectively work together as a unit, then we can change a lot. And one of the things that I heard from an old mentor of mine is that it's a kid that was on the beach and he was walking and he seen a bunch of starfish and he wanted to run out and save all of the starfish, but he realized he can't save all of the starfish. So he started grabbing specific starfish one by one and tossed them in the water. And the man said, well, what are you doing? He said, well, if I can't save them all, I'm gonna save as many as I can possibly save without overwhelming yourself. So self-health, self-care is very important, and always seek more to know more.
I just wanted to say I am very proud of you for stepping outside of your comfort zone and facilitating this conversation. You know, just reiterating what I said in the beginning of this conversation is to, you know, do your study and to connect with those that are on that same vibration that you are on when it's coming to liberating your community, liberating yourself. And so, you know, I'll make myself available if you ever want to connect. You know, I'm definitely available to do that. And yeah, again, I'm really proud of you.
And I'd like to say that healing it's an ongoing thing. You know, one of the things that we know is that we've made strides. It's not all, you know, that we're not back in the time of the slaves. Jim Crow is going. I'm not going to say it's gone, but we have made strides, and it's because of the fact that we are a curious people. We are an intelligent people. We have so much to give to each other as well as to the world in general. And, you know, we will always survive. A people that survived 400 years and 200 years of that was in slavery. And there's a quote I'd like to say. Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote a book called Between the World and Me. And the quote is, we were people turned to fuel for the American machine. That quote, it hit me so hard, I cannot tell you, because when you think about what that is and what that means, we were fuel for the American machine. And we are no longer fuel for the American machine. We still can be, but we don't have to be. And that's where that healing has to come in. We can no longer allow the culture, the dominant culture, to make us that fuel. And that's through incarceration now. That is through a very different type of slavery, through the violence that we see from the police on the streets. It goes across all lines. So, you know, my hope is that as we begin to heal one another and love one another and care for one another, that we no longer allow ourselves to be that fuel.
Yeah, I'd also like to thank you for inviting me here, and this is quite the panel. I was very impressed with you younger folks, quote unquote. I was at a meeting with one of the ladies who first started Black Lives Matter, and she says, get involved in the movement, stay with those people, and know that a movement has 4 factions to it. It has the helpers, and the helpers are the ones that, you know, don't like to be in the front line, but like to make signs and do things of that, get people rides, right? You have your organizer. They're the ones that tell you where you're gonna go on Tuesday and Thursday and what's gonna happen, right? You have your, I guess would be, I'm trying to say the proper word here, it would be advocates. And those are the ones that actually do not share the same skin tone or whatnot, but understand or believe what you believe. And then you have your radical. The radical is the one that gets in the face of the media. The radicals was those 2 ladies in Seattle that challenged Bernie Sanders, that says there's something wrong here. And to do that builds hope for those around us and starts the healing process, because you can't heal a wound until you undress it, look at it, scrape it, and start fixing on it. So I wish you luck.
Thank you. Thanks for all the kind words, guys. I'm going to pass it off to Lindsay now. So, Lindsay.
Gerald, go ahead. Did you want to say one last thing?
Yeah, if I can. I guess what I would be saying to the folks is look for mentors. People like Mr. Brown right here. He's got energy. He's connected in with very powerful brothers and sisters. Connect in with Lindsay's organization. You want to get into school, find me. I'm at Renton Technical College, G. Bradford at rtc.edu. Education is the key for freedom, economic freedom. We have to start there. I would say this, there's a bar from EPMD. I'm going to be poetic, but with hip hop this time. If you hang with 9 broke friends, you're bound to be the 10th one. So I cut my friends off and went for self. Me and Eric Sermon and nobody else. And that's from EPMD. And what that bar said to me is that the journey that I'm on might not necessarily be the journey that everyone's on. So I need to go ahead and do what I need to do for myself. But in that vein, I need to find people that are moving in that direction as well, align myself with them, so that if I'm hanging with 9 guys in the corner, I'm the 10th guy in the corner. But if I'm hanging with 9 bank CEOs, then I'm a bank CEO as well. So we have to change our narrative with how the spaces that we move. The last thing I will say is that our people are eagles, but as an eagle, you don't see eagles hanging around with pigeons. So we have to make sure that we stay regal in how we move. And when people who are harmful to us, we need to fly higher. Okay, get your wings going and fly higher, because at the end of the day, that pigeon will take you down. The key is for us to be able to find commonality in our community in order to be able to use our collective geniuses in order for us to be able to move forward. And that comes back to being able to use our words versus acting out in situations where we don't necessarily agree with one another. We need to get to a point where we can agree to disagree so that we continue to have conversations on what is relevant to us. Thank you for letting me share, Lindsay. I appreciate the opportunity.
I really want to thank Michaela for stepping out of her comfort zone, first of all, because, you know, she was not comfortable, and saying yes. For every person on this panel, and I asked them and I told them what my vision was, they said yes. And one thing about this weekend is everyone who you're going to see through Saturday and Sunday, they all said yes. They said yes to not just a vision of being on a stage and singing or dancing or speaking. They said yes to not to starting to open a wound within our community and start talking about it. Start breathing with each other, start living with each other, start healing each other, start talking to each other. So even though COVID has made it to where we can't be in each other's presence, and I can't be around all these lovely people, they all said yes, and they are all here, and they all gave me grace as we kind of ran late this afternoon, this evening. And I really want to thank everyone who said yes to my vision and who keeps moving forward with me, and who wants to rip the Band-Aid off of the festering wound, so that way we can move forward and we can grow together and we can love on each other. Every one of these people, my mom, Lotus, Gerald, my uncle, Manny, and Threat, and Michaela, they all have a purpose in my life, and they all have taught me something, some that they might know and some that they might not know. But every person that has spoke has so much power. And that's the beginning of our weekend of this weekend, is really talking about power within each other. And this is my family right here, and you're going to meet more of my family throughout the weekend. So as we opened up with a poem and to speaking to our ancestors, we're going to close this with a poem from my diva, my mom, and she's going to close the space, so that way we can just start the weekend off right, talking to our ancestors and speaking life into each other. And then after she closes with a poem, I will see you guys all next week. Not next week, excuse me, tomorrow at 10 a.m. And just look for the live stream, click on Federal Way Black Collective, and we'll keep streaming on MSC. They're going to partner that way. And we'll see you all tomorrow.
Many of us have grown up with a word that has taken us out of where we are and slain us. The N word is something that for Black people has been a ongoing from almost the beginning of time. We have been singled out because of our melanin. And there is a time in our lives where we recognize that. Every one of us could probably go back to that time. And I'm going to read you a poem about my time. It's called Lessons in Anger, Sticks and Stones. Can't say when, must have been about the beginning of time. A wedding took place. Hate met ignorance, formed a loathsome union. I met their son when I was 5. He wasn't much, just a word. 1,000 words had gone before, none so maiming though. He took from me, knocked me down in one cruel moment. Nigger. I got up confused and longing, now in his strange world. Colors dulled by hot feudal winds, clouds that never soothe the pleading cracks of earth, green tree muted, blue sky vague. Now, won't dream so easily, won't trust so readily. He never went too far away, hid mostly just around the bend, still knocked me down. He never took from me again. I hear his laughter, sounds of dry gusts blowing. My mama whispered his name. He said he had a few. Bigotry, prejudice, racism, angry names. Couldn't pronounce them. Even so, when I was 5, I understood. Thank you.
Peace and blessings. We'll see you all
Thank
tomorrow.
you. Bless.
Bye.
Take care.